There you go. Newly elected council member Larry Bagley. And Larry and I go back almost as far as I go back with anyone in this city.
Well, we had hair when we first met each other.
Well, yeah, he had here. And Larry, we're sort of especially proud of Larry, and in some ways he shares some characteristics with Sally Clark, and I'll come back to Sally in just a minute. But Larry has served on the Kono board. Larry was first vice president when I joined the Kono board, and he understands neighborhoods. He knows what it's like to try to keep a neighborhood involved and organized, and how to get things working, and when you know you haven't, and the inevitable small failures that we all have in neighborhoods, and also the usually good successes we have. So I'll have Larry come up in just a minute. I wanted to explain about Sally Clark. I know some of you didn't get our notice. Sally was asked by the state legislature to come up and testify about stormwater, about some stormwater measures that are being contemplated. And at the last minute, almost literally, I called Larry and said, "Can you step in?" And he was gracious enough to say yes.
He said he'd have pecan pie for me, so.
And he did, and I delivered, that's right.
Oh, that's...
If you haven't eaten the pecan pie at the Corner Cafe, I recommend, any of their pies are wonderful. She makes them fresh every day. It's beautiful stuff. Larry, it's all yours.
As Dave said, I'm not Sally Clark. Well, we kind of started together in Kono, both of them, Margaret Radford, Sally Clark, and myself, Jan Doran. We're all, 20 some odd years ago, we're in Kono at that time. So both Sally and Margaret went on to be county commissioners and did great stuff. So I'm trying to follow in their footsteps. I'm just doing it a few years later. I'm not as young as they were when they started doing this. It's a learning process for me. What I'll try to do is kind of give you a little background about my involvement with Kono and neighborhoods, and related to that is kind of a grassroots type thing of democracy and getting the word up to the elected officials. And then I'll talk a little bit about the recent election and as a new person, my observations about campaigning and getting elected. As we said, I started out in Kono back in around 94, 95 time period. I retired from the Air Force in 92 and moved back here permanently. And in 78, we had bought a house in Falcon Estates at Woodman Academy. Excuse me, at that time, we were in the county. And then moved back in 92 permanently, as I said, and got involved with the Homeowners Association originally in late 93, early 94. And part of the reason I did it because there was going to be, the city was going to annex us. We were talking about annexing us even that early in 93, and we were finally annexed in about 92, 95, 96 time period. And in addition to that, the city and planners were saying they were going to do development along Academy, north from Woodman up toward Southgate. And the first one that had gone in, actually when I was still in Guam in 83 and 84, Walmart was talking about going in at the corner of where Sam's Club is now. And I wasn't involved in the Homeowners Association, but that was delayed. And then in 93, 94, 95 time period, we started the development. So I got involved with the Homeowners Association at that time and working with the developers, trying to minimize the impact of the neighborhood. Falcon Estates, and even as late as 92, was a horse community. Most of the people, we had, in Falcon Estates, we have an acre and a half lots. And in the late 60s, most of the houses were built in the late 60s, and it was horse property. People, ride their horses through the neighborhood. Most of the kids, teenagers, would ride out at Kit Carson Riding Arena, and it belonged to the Kit Carson Riding Club. In 78, that was true, definitely, and then in 92, it still was true. But we had a lot of horse people. The people in Falcon Estates that lived on both sides of Academy. Falcon Estates was split by Academy Boulevard. We had Lower Falcon on the west side, used to be a marsh down in that area back before the houses were built. And then on the east side of Academy was the other part of Falcon Estate, split about equally, about 300 houses, 280, 290 houses, and about equally split on either side of Academy. Then to the east of us is Columbine Estates that has 2 3-acre lots, and they were horse properties in the 70s and up to the 90s also. So the Falcon Estates folks that lived along Academy Boulevard from Woodman north, most of them wanted to sell their property. They were all for development. The reason was that their driveways emptied onto Academy Boulevard, which is now a 4-lane road, which originally had been a 2-lane dirt road in the south gate of the Academy back in the 60s. And so they were having trouble getting into and out of their properties, because of the traffic that had fairly well increased on Academy. In '78, when we had horses, our daughter and son would ride our horse, Mariah, a little Arabian quarter horse mixed mare, across Academy Boulevard down to I-25 and Woodman. There used to be an arena there where Carrabba's is, so they could run parallels and poles and time their events, practice all this in the arena. So they would ride across Academy Boulevard. I wouldn't even walk across Academy Boulevard right now. But so in '95, '96 time period, we were looking at this development. A lot of the folks wanted to sell their homes. Some did not want to, the majority were really against any change. It was going to change the neighborhood, the traffic was going to destroy the neighborhood, the noise was going to be atrocious, we were going to have all that riprap coming through the neighborhood, and it was just really at odds. We had people who wanted to sell, and then it was a lot of discussion about whether it be 2 lots in, which would be 2 acres in from Academy on either side, or 1 lot or 2 lots. Well, 1 lot you couldn't really build on it. 3 lots you got into where most of those people that were 3 lots in, 3 acres in, did not want to sell. So it was like even within Falcon Estates, we had little groups that were antagonistic toward each other, sending nasty grams, threatening to sue. The city was saying they were going to annex us anyway during the annexation process, and we had Woodman Water, we had our own water supply at that time, and that they would condemn our wells because a lot of animosity. Then the developers were included in that. So it took a lot of hard work by a lot of people, both on the city side, the developer side, and on the homeowner side, to work through the development plan, the development planning process, and eventually we came to a fairly reasonable, I think, solution. And Kono was involved a little bit toward the end. We weren't involved with Kono in '92, '93. Didn't even know about it. Found out later. We could have had a lot more help than we had asked for. It did help us with the widening of Woodman and the overpass at Woodman when we were going through that development. But going back to, so we had the conditions of records that we were putting on development plans, included things like minimizing odors from hamburger places. We didn't want to smell hamburgers being cooked at 6 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. If I smelled them, I would go down and get a hamburger, and that would not be good. But eventually we ended up that we would have since it was going to be a very high-density commercial development, abutting up against essentially a rural residential area, horses, barns. We actually have a camel now, but that's a different story. Not we don't have one, but in the neighborhood we have one. So we went through a lot of painful meetings. We started off with one section being developed. We worked through and got the limitation of the lighting. They agreed not to put the lighting any taller than yes, and that was the light pollution. I learned more phrases than I ever wanted to learn about light pollution. But it did, with the light shining in your bedroom window, there were problems. So then we worked all through that with the city, got it on the conditions of records to limit the lighting, put up it's a 14-foot wall, masonry between the Falcon Estates and on both sides of Academy, between the development and the residential area. And at first it sounded like it was going to be like a prison, and we were joking about putting gun turrets on the entrances to Falcon Estates, and it was a very interesting time. But actually, it turns out the people that are living right up against the wall have come to really like their wall. You know, it's kind of a strange thing. The traffic mitigation, Kevin Kratt was one of the developers, and he did a magnificent job working with us on drainage. Well, all the developers along Academy especially worked with us to ensure that the drainage was sufficient. We were worried about drainage, especially in Lower Falcon, because it had been a marsh at one time, and the water table was fairly high. And in any range, you would have basements filling up with water, and had to have sump pumps put in for that. But we're working with it, and actually decreased. We still have problems in the Lower Falcon on heavy rains, but it's because the soil gets saturated. It's not because of the runoff from the development. The runoff from the development is pretty well taken care of by the drainage that's been installed by the developers. So the drainage problem was taken care of. The traffic mitigation did well on that. We still have traffic cut through in Falcon Estates, but primarily is because of the traffic on Woodman and Academy. When that gets backed up at Union, say, people cut through our neighborhood to get to Briargate, and we do have problems with people speeding, running stop signs, and the residents say it's all that pass-through traffic, and yet I see some of my neighbors who are doing probably 40 on Schreider in a 25 zone and just blowing off the stop sign. So it's not just a cut-through traffic, it's us also. We do it in here. So we worked all through that, got the development pretty well settled. Each time we had a new development, like Russenack was one of the last ones to develop his property by Home Depot, just to the north of Home Depot. He has Acaba, Qdoba. Oh, Qdoba, yeah, that's it, okay. And language is not one of my strong suits. And the Russenack building itself, he was one of the last ones to develop. And by that time, we had the conditions of records down there where we had like 15 of them. And it was just, here they are, you know, and very little argument, and it went very smoothly. So the development, dense development with an urban environment can work. It's not the best of solutions, but it can work, and if you work with the developers and with homeowners and neighbors, you can reach a solution that is fairly win-win, not totally, but fairly win-win. So we had a good experience with that. Eventually, we all got it. Then we got into the Woodman widening and the overpass, and interesting. Again, there was a lot of people against change. That's really the biggest problem, is when things start changing, you start thinking about your property values are going to change or decrease. And in our case with the development, everybody said it was going to be, our property values were going to decrease. And actually in 2008 they did. Had nothing to do with the development. No. But they're back up now. Houses that are selling for more than they were 5-10 years ago. Even our house is appraised at more than we paid for it, which I would say to my wife, sell it, but she doesn't want to move. So anyway, okay. Any comments or questions about the development, the homeowners' involvement? Yes, ma'am.
How many active homeowners got involved, or did they kind of defer to a leadership group?
Well, interesting. In 95, 96 time period, during the height of the annexation issue and the development issue, out of 290, and I say that because some houses were moved and destroyed during the development, those lots. So we might have had 300 before the development, probably about 280 now. And at one time we had 200 members in the HOA, wow, which was a good, very good percentage. Of those 200, we'd get maybe 100 at a meeting every once in a while. Generally, it was about 50, 60, but that was because it was very focused, and we had issues. You know, the water, everybody was concerned about it, you know, losing our Woodman water supply and going on the city, and then there's an issue about possibly we're on septic tanks now, and there was an issue about possibly having to go on sewers, and that's going to cost homeowners $60,000, $80,000, $90,000 to go on a sewer. So people were involved because they had a very high interest, because of the possibility of things that would. Now, since then, we had kind of a surge during the Woodman widening and the overpass issue. We probably have in the homeowner association about 120, 130 now that are paid members, and it's voluntary. We're a voluntary homeowner association, $25 a year for membership, and yeah. So, and then again, of those 120, 130, you know, if we have a general membership meeting, it's probably 20 or 30 that show up, because there's no issue right now. Did I answer your question? I tend to ramble.
Yeah, no, it's
Yes,
fine.
ma'am.
When Kona became involved in your process, what role did
Oh,
Kona play?
good question. They represented us at council meetings. They gave us more of a voice than we had just as ourselves. They gave us information about what we could do, what couldn't be done. They offered, if we needed to, we could find